Good evening, everybody. Happy June the 19th, day after Father's Day. Hope all you dads out there had a good day. And you stepdads and big brothers and anybody filling that role, including single moms doing double duty. Appreciate you. Welcome to my channel, Hockey Books and Storytellers. It is Monday, June the 19th, and it is book review day. As promised on my last video, we are doing double duty today, 2-for-1 special. First up is going to be the Rebel League, the short and unruly life of the World Hockey Association by local sports writing legend Ed Willis, one of the best in the business. I'm going to follow that up in a few minutes with a Slapshot in Time, the wild but true history of the Minnesota Fighting Saints. I'm sure you see a correlation between the two books. Now, let's get it started with the Rebel League, the short and unruly life of the World Hockey Association. Title says it all. For those of you who aren't old enough to remember the World Hockey Association, falls to those of us who are left to pass along such knowledge. And personally, I barely remember the WHA. We didn't pay it much attention. We were obsessed with our NHL heroes at the time. And yeah, I paid the WHA very little attention. And since they didn't have a TV contract, they showed some games locally on the smaller channels, and so we did get to see it a little bit, but I really didn't pay much attention at all to it. And I remember going to one Vancouver Blazers game, and the only thing I remember is that former Canuck George Gardner was playing in goal. I think they lost, but George Gardner was in goal for Vancouver, and he played really well. I mean, I just remember he was the only reason that they were in the game. Excuse me, I gotta moisten my vocal cords here. I see the ear, nose, and throat guy on Wednesday. Find out what my issue is. Now, Ed Willis is a great writer, and he does an absolutely stellar job of chronicling the history of the league that drove the NHL absolutely batty. So, as I've recounted in the past, my favorite part of playing senior hockey was the bus trips. And after games, we'd stop at the local watering hole and get off sales, and guys would start drinking and just start telling stories. And man, I would just sit there and listen and laugh. And oh my God, I wish I could remember some of them, because it just some of them just defied the laws of physics, and it just was so much fun. This book really takes me back to that time. Mr. Willis must have had a research staff in the hundreds, because it seemed like he got quotes from almost everybody who had anything to do with the World Hockey Association. There's so many names. Names such as Jacques Demers, Mark Tardif, Bobby Hull, Jerry Cheevers, Wayne Gretzky, Mark Messier, Paul Schmier, Ace Bailey, Gary Smith, Nelson Scalabania, Peter Pocklington, Hanson Brothers, Gordie Howe, Wild Bill Hunter, Harry Neal, Bill Goldthorpe, who was the inspiration for Ogie Oglethorpe from Slapshot, Richard Brodeur, and last but not least, a lot of the quotes, really quoted extensively in this book was John Garrett, because he played 7 seasons in the WHA for 4 different teams, so he was there for the whole ride, and, he was counted on heavily to recount some of the best stories, and it's not long into the book before the wild tales begin. It starts with the idea of a new professional league, born by guys who started the American Basketball Association. They knew nothing about hockey. They were just, the American Basketball Association only lasted so long before merging into the NBA, and that's what their plan was for the World Hockey Association: start another pro league and have it merge with the NHL. So the history of the league is told in a non-linear fashion. So it starts out at the beginning for sure, but then it just kind of bounces around from every season. So, and when you're reading the book, you understand why that had to be done. It just it was just such a crazy league that you had to get something from the end before it would make sense at the beginning, and so it was very entertaining that way. um yeah, there's just no apparent plan, just like the league itself. So, and the book starts out, with the first important signing, Bobby Hull, which gave the league instant credibility. Um, and then Gordie Howe coming in season number 2 was, they said that had those two players not signed, the league probably never would have made it past the first season. So, and uh, there's a lot of bush league stories because there was guys coming up. They had to stock the league with players, so players who coming from the minors and juniors who hadn't played pro hockey before. They were even getting players from senior hockey. So and they had they had teams playing in arenas that were in the bad part of town where the players would get mugged and their cars stolen. And some arenas were next to stockyards or killing fields, and the smell, the smell just permeated the air. And there's the story of Derek Sanderson, who he's playing with the Boston Bruins, and the Philadelphia Blazers are hot on his tail trying to get him to sign, and so he walks into the negotiation, and he's he's half drunk, and so then they just started throwing numbers at him, and he just standing there. He didn't know what to say because these numbers surprised him. He expected to get a certain amount, and they were just going they were just way beyond what he expected, and so he just stood there and was staring at them, and they just kept upping the numbers and just saying, yeah, he said it was the best contract negotiation he ever got because he got an extra half a million just for standing there with his mouth shut. So, who needs an agent? Yeah, and he got stuff included in his contract, things like he didn't have to play road games. Nobody could get traded without his say so. Nobody could get sent down to the minors without his permission. Just crazy stuff that he got put into his contract. But the money that he got was his downfall. Everybody knows the story of Derek Sanderson, and I remember him reading somewhere that he had so much money and he didn't have to play road games, so he was flying his friends to Hawaii for the weekend, um, and stuff like that. So, um, and there's stories of missed payrolls, and the league was always struggling just to pay the players because their business plan was to pay the players more than the NHL, so they would attract more of the talent. And it was just unsustainable. But there's stories like Jacques Demers coached 4 different teams and never got fired. So, and then one of my favorite stories, San Diego Bev, team in San Diego had a groupie named San Diego Bev, and apparently she had a thing for goalies. So I won't spoil the story for you, but that was that was a funny one. Frank Beaton, who was a player, and he had an arrest warrant out for him, so he took off to the dressing room a little bit early, and they hit him in an equipment bag. and the cops are out in the rink looking for him, and he's in an equipment bag. They just carried him out. So he eventually got caught the next year, but yeah, that's funny. And Bill Goldthorpe, who was the inspiration for Ogie Oglethorpe, like I said, one roommate described him as like Kato from the Pink Panther movies. He was always jumping out from behind stuff, and he always wanted to wrestle. So John Garrett tells a story of having a $20,000 bonus in his contract for 30 wins, and the team folded when he was at 28, so he never got his 20 grand. He also talks about this one blows me away, a 21 game road trip. Like if you get 5 or 6 games in the NHL, that's a long road trip. I can't imagine 21 games. You'd go loopy. So one arena had chicken wire instead of plexiglass. Mike Walton got body checked into the end of the arena, and a opposing fan pushed his face up against the chicken wire and started yelling at Walton. So Walton butt ended him in the head and knocked him out, and he ended up getting charged with assault. Yeah, the charges were eventually dropped, and Harry Neal convinced the judge that, the guy wasn't a normal hockey fan. And Ed Willis writes, well, that makes sense because it wasn't a normal league. One of the Hanson brothers fought Bobby Hull and inadvertently grabbed his toupee off his head. Bobby Hull left the ice and went and got a helmet. There's just endless stories like this, just story after story after story. It is so much fun, this book. That's got to be, you have to include this book in your library if you are a hockey fan at all. And even if you're not, you'll probably find this book great. I thoroughly enjoyed it from cover to cover, and wish there was an accompanying documentary, because I'd really like to see some of the film evidence of all these things. Like, there was just so many crazy things that happened. And in this book, like I said, was published in 2004, and it really stands the test of time. I mean, we've lost quite a few guys who were quoted in this book. A lot of them have passed on, including Ace Bailey, who died in the 9/11 attacks. He was in one of the planes that flew into the World Trade Center. And he was a good friend of Gretzky. So, that really hit home when I read that. Now, one last point, I'd really like to give my compliments to the editors. I mean, usually you'll find some mistakes in any book you read, but this one was perfect. I didn't notice one mistake, not a single error. An absolute 5 out of 5. Couldn't get a higher rating, an absolute no doubter. If you're a hockey fan, you really, really need to get this book. So anyway, we'll switch over to, man, I'm tired talking so much. So, so a slap shot in time. Just get my notes on this one. Get them up here. Move that over here. Move this over there. Get that over there. Okay. Yeah, Slapshot in Time, The Wild But True History of the Minnesota Fighting Saints by Don Whenesota. It's a great name, Dan Whenesota. I love that name. As I stated previously, I think the Minnesota Fighting Saints have the 3rd best jersey in the history of hockey. Chicago's number 1, Detroit's number 2, Minnesota's Fighting Saints number 3. I would love to get a Minnesota Fighting Saints jersey. Now, in the Rebel League, Ed Willis expertly reconstructs the history of the WHA, while this book does a deeper dive into the history of one of the cornerstone franchises. From the gestation of the franchise to the ultimate demise and short-term resurrection, we learn a lot about the behind-the-scenes business dealings of the multiple owners. Yeah, a lot of business dealings. Like, they were always just struggling to survive, and so they had to, every day was crunch time, and so now they were you know, and they went through multiple owners, and then they were just able to keep ahead of the debt collectors. They suffered from the main problem that a lot of teams had back then, in that they didn't own their arena, so they didn't get any of the concessions or parking, which was a lucrative part of the business. So it's almost like half of it. So how are you supposed to survive when you're playing with one hand tied behind your back, basically? So, and this book is more fact driven, more statistic driven. But as with the Rebel League, it contains a lot of funny stories, a lot of crazy characters. Harry Neal, Glenn Sonmore, Gord Machine Gun Gallant, nicknamed that because of how fast he could throw hands. Like, it just like when he punched, it was like a machine gun going off. And uh, Dave Keon, Mike Antonovich, Brian Butters, etc., etc. A lot of crazy characters. It's a pretty short read, only 150 pages, but it packs in a ton of information. Um, Mr. Whenesota gets right into statistics about individual games. So many fights and brawls. In the age of the Broad Street Bullies, almost the whole WHA seemed to follow in those footsteps in the book. The book also contains fun facts, just little sections where it's a fun fact, and where he tells a funny story. And one of the first ones was head coach Glenn Sonmore on the opening night of the franchise. He's wearing a red sport coat, so the fans thought he was an usher. And they're asking him, if he can help them find their seats. um, and the story even includes some stories of the Saints minor league team in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, the Johnstown Jets, which is where Slapshot was filmed. Slapshot is quoted extensively in this book, so it has a theme right through the book, because it seemed like the movie is just basically about the Minnesota Fighting Saints and the Johnstown Jets. So um, it tells you why. Bruce Boudreau had a small part in the film. He played an opposing player. Um, Another story has a player thinking, "This one's awesome. This is the best story in the book." But um, one story has a player thinking he fought one guy 3 times, and he comes back to the bench and he's just exhausted. He says, "That guy just keeps coming and coming. He never gets tired." And then he finally found out that he had fought all 3 Hanson brothers. So um, the book goes into the rivalry between the North Stars and the Fighting Saints. How they would try to one up each other in their advertising campaigns, and how the NHL, had their snooty attitude towards the WHA. And in the end, the city just could not support 2 professional teams, and not surprisingly, that they ended up not having any. So for a while they didn't have any NHL team until the Minnesota Wild came along. And for a community that attracts, almost 18,000 fans for, a state high school championship game, it really says something. It deserves an NHL team. And it's sad that for purely financial reasons, the state of hockey, that's what they call Minnesota, the state of hockey, had to suffer without an elite team. Yeah, when the Saints' inevitable demise midseason finally came, it summed up really well in the closing pages. And quote, "At face value, closing up early may seem odd for an organization that spent 5 years getting extensions for deadlines, borrowing money from one bank to pay another, and always having one last trick up its sleeve. But the Fighting Saints were always an organization that was unpredictable and did things differently. In a way, folding before the deadline and doing the opposite of what everyone expected was the most Fighting Saints thing they could have done." Unquote. So, all in all, an interesting read. A little repetitive with the statistics, but lots of great pictures. And there's a website up that has even more pictures. It's in the book, so look for that. You know, one of the most interesting teams to ever ever lace on a pair of skates. And there's definitely a place in this place for this book in any hockey library. So I give it 4.5 out of 5, and that's that's basically all I got to say about that. So thanks for watching. Hit the like button, please, and subscribe if you can. Please share this video. And if you want to support the channel and be a patron, patreon.com, just punch in hockey books and storytellers in the search bar, and we will come up. Having said that, I think that's all I got for you. Thursday coming up, movie review day. Instead of doing a single movie, I got a I got a request from somebody to review Eating Raoul. Just the one movie that I walked out of, and I've never walked out of a movie since then. It just the worst worst possible movie ever in the history of film. So I won't be doing that. What I'm going to do is my top 10 guilty pleasures. I gonna have a top 10 list of movies that maybe didn't get reviewed very well, like they didn't get great reviews and maybe didn't do too well at the box office, but they're ones that I really enjoy and I've watched many times. So you're going to get my top 10 list on that. So we'll see you Thursday, and we'll hope everybody has a good week until then. Cheers all.